Today's presentation is going to be on the fair use policy and what guidelines the courts use when they're looking at the fair use policy and whether or not you abided by the rules or not. So I'm just going to go over the four basic things that the courts will use when they decide whether or not something is applicable to be used by a teacher or by a school under their laws. The first category that they're going to use is the purpose and the character of the use. Nonprofit status gets more favorable treatment, which means that if it's a nonprofit school, the courts are going to decide more in your favor that it was able to be used, and the information was, okay, and you can't get in any trouble for using it. The second part of this is they say to change the information up a little bit so it's not a mere copy of the original, which means, change some wording around, change some paragraphs around, don't copy it word for word, just make it your own, instead of word for word, because otherwise, you're going to need to cite your sources, and the courts will actually look more favorably upon you if it's not a mere copy of the original. The third part of this category is to change the intended purpose of the information being used. If you take, some information and it was maybe put together like in a bibliography, but you're using it in a different way, that's going to be a big deal through the courts and through the system that you're going to have to go through. If there's something, that was written maybe on flowers, but you're going to use it, in your science class for, just an example or whatever, that's going to change the original intended purpose, so you'll look more favorable to the courts if you kind of change it up a little bit and use it for the purpose that it was originally not intended for it to be used for. The second category that they're going to use when they decide is the nature of the copyrighted work. They say that biographies are better to use versus novels. So if you take like information from a biography, that's a lot better to use that information than, if you take something from a novel or, a play and, use everything again, change it up a little bit, don't make it a mere copy, because then it's just going to, fall back onto the copyright laws where you need to cite the sources. Um, biographies are always better because it's actual factual information that people have taken about somebody's life. So it can come from multiple, number of sources. If you take information, if you're teaching your students something about like George Washington and you take information from multiple sources, they're all going to give the exact same birth date, death date, presidential date, and different dates like that. So, that's all like pretty much common knowledge and something that can be found in any place. So it's going to be a lot better to use that versus, if you find a novel that was written about, the life of the presidents, of the United States, different things like that. It's going to be a lot better if you take the information from biographies versus novels. Published versus unpublished, there's not a huge difference versus that. They say that to make sure that you cite your sources no matter what, no matter if it's published or unpublished, because it should be up to the original author when for them to decide when this work gets published. So it's not up to you. So you just make sure that whether it's published or unpublished, you're still citing your sources and you're using it how you should be. The third category that they're going to look at is the amount of the information used. If you just take little bits of information here and there, it's going to be a lot better because you're not taking a whole blob of information, 2-3 pages at a time. If you just kind of pick out here and there, take some information like that and use that, that's going to be a lot better. The major theme of your work, if you can change it up, then from what it was originally intended to be, it's going to be a lot better because you're changing the theme, you're changing the original intent and purpose of it, which kind of goes back to the first category. Um, Parodies are okay, like if you take and you give your students an assignment that, they have to make a parody of a song, and work it into a lesson plan somehow, that's okay. You don't need to worry about copyright on that because you're, again, changing the original intent and purpose. You're not copying word for word. Basically what you're doing is just kind of changing it around, taking the words and changing them around, making new words, things like that. So, the courts have decided that parodies are okay to use, and you are allowed to use that without citing your sources. The last category that the courts and the systems are going to look at is the effect on market value of the work. Um, you know, if you take a play, say you want your students to put a play on, for parents and everything like that. Um, is it going to have any effect on the author's financial gains? Are you going to charge admission for this? Um, where normally that the original author would be able to make some money off of this, and are you going to take everything and you're going to collaborate it? Are you going to take, poems from 6 different books that you had found and put them all into a new book and publish that, or give it to your students and make some type of monetary, value off of it, because that's money that should go to the original author, not you that have taken everything and collaborated together on it. So you just kind of have to watch, if it should benefit the original authoring versus, if it's going to benefit you any at all either. So that's kind of what I put together on my Prezi to show you guys today. And then I also have a handout. Um, it's under the Fair Use Act. And it just basically goes over some of the information that I've already went over with everybody. Um, it is important to realize that even as an educator, there are implications to utilizing works that belongs to someone else. There are laws in place that protect everyone's original work, whether it is published or not published. It is imperative that everyone know what information is allowed to be used in the classroom, and what information requires educators to cite the sources they are using. And again, I'm listing the 4 guidelines or rules that exist that are used by courts to determine if information that is shared with students, crosses that line of being copyrighted, to make sure that you don't need to cite your sources and things like that. And I kind of just give a brief overview again of, what I talked about earlier. The first one is courts will decide whether the information is an exact replica of the original. If it needs to be used from other sources as part of the lesson plan, change it up a bit so it's not word for word. It looks a lot better than if everything is written exactly as it appears. If you have to take a paragraph of information, from an original source, change up the wording a little bit, change some words here and there, and maybe mix it around a little bit so it's not all word for word again. And again, the second thing that will be looked at is the nature of the copyrighted work. If you're using the information from a biography, this is understandably utilized in a copyrighted form. If the information is taken from a novel or work of fiction, this might not go over well because, again, use information from works that are not published. It should be the original author as to whether it should be up to the original author as to when and where their information and their work, first gets published. It shouldn't be up to you whether you take that information and you publish it yourself. That's the original author. And also be careful when you have your students put together, like a book of poetry or a book of short stories. And if you want to turn these in to get published, be careful with that too, because these are your students' original works, whether they're in kindergarten or they're seniors in high school. It doesn't matter. They've taken the time, they've written this, they put the thought into it. This should be up to them. So make sure you're getting permission from your students and your students' teacher or parents before you publish anything like that. And then if it needs to be used, make sure the information is just a little bit at a time. Again, reword as much as possible so it does not sound exactly like the original. And then it'll also kind of keep away from, the same theme as the original too. If the information is borrowed, take it from an unlikely source, so it changes it up a little bit. Like I stated earlier, if you need to, you know, do something about Shakespeare, take it from maybe somebody that's written about Shakespeare, so that way you're not taking it exactly from something that Shakespeare's written, and change it up a little bit. Um, and then in the last part of it again is, the information will benefit new authority or new author any, financially or stature, it should not be used. Because you don't want to make some money off of somebody else's work, because, how would you feel if somebody took your work and made, money off of it? That's money that should belong to you. You put the time and the effort into writing this. That money should go to you. Just be smart and don't copyright somebody else's work, and go from there, and, you'll be okay. Just use small bits, change it up. Um, if you need to use stuff, make sure it's from an unlikely source. That way, everything is good to go. Thank you.